data for making great products? This is a question that I get, and I spend sometimes with, especially with the people that join the team, and they don't have a background in product, and they come from other disciplines, because it's important for them to understand why it's so important in the product construct. There are many things that you can use data for, and many areas, but I kind of highlight the 4 ones that I feel, or I think they are really important when it comes to product. Obviously, the first one, and we will go a bit deeper about that, is it really allows you to create better product strategies. It really helps you to tell the story about why you are making this product, what you are making about it. So I think that's definitely one area that you can use data, and you will see, and we will talk about a little bit more later. I think it's also critical around for the prioritization process. That is one of the responsibilities of product management. It really helps you to make more informed, to be more fact-based product manager when it comes to, what features goes in, what features goes out. That is probably one of the day-to-day things that happens in product management. The third one, and probably the most obvious one, is around the impact of understanding the performance of your product. So that's something always that as product, we are always wondering, right? So is my product performing as my hypothesis? Is things working? Are not working? Why are not working? Why are they working? So I think definitely is where the area that probably, if you have to, when you enter in product management, is one of the first areas that you're going to in the usage of data. And the fourth one, and also I think, in my opinion, and based on my experience, is one of the things that probably is a bit overlooked in some cases, is around operations. Having a good understanding of the data around how, especially for those product teams that are managing business critical, that like finance and financial applications, where they are very sensitive around operations using the data. So to make decisions about to pull the feature, not to pull the feature, is critical, because it can save time, it can save money, it can save energy, and it can save a good sleep, because sometimes production issues are interesting. So with no more delay, again, as I just want to reinforce that if you guys feel you have any questions, I'm comfortable to take through the presentation. So feel free to ask questions or something is not understood. If we look at why it's important to use data, and I put a very simple, this is a very obviously simplification of how to build a product strategy, but you see that when you have your data in your product story, the level of the quality, and especially when you are depending on who is the audience that you are talking to, the story gets better, and you have more way to leverage the data and achieve the objective. It can be, when you are convincing a stakeholder around investment, or when you are talking to your marketing partners about what is the product and where the users are. So as you see here, like if you go from the left to the right, the level of quality and the level of understanding what you are trying to achieve gets bigger and better. So data is something that I encourage my teams especially to use in order in the product stories, because it gives a dimension that qualitative data, for example, many research, and it complements very well when you are building your strategy. The challenge as product managers here is about using the right data, and in that sense, I like to pick the example of. I hope everyone knows about Stripe. It's a company that is doing payments. Is one of my favorites in the space, and there's an interview in the Knowledge Project with the CIO Patrick Collision, and for me, I'm picking this example. How you don't need to overwhelm your audience with a lot of data. It's about picking the right one, and I like that because in this interview is a really long interview, but he was going through why he started the Stripe and why he thought there was an opportunity. And when they came to the number of the 2% of people spending in the internet, and understanding that 90%, or I don't know what is the number, is using internet, you don't need to much more to understand where is the gap and where is the opportunity. Obviously, this is, again, another simplification, but it's a good example how data, a key data point can serve yourself in order to understand why you are doing something. So, and that's something that I insist a lot on my teams, and I put a lot of effort because it really helps you to tell you the story right. In that matter, I think there are a few, like do's and don'ts that I always remind my product managers or the team that are working. I believe some of them might be in this call, so they might be rolling their eyes right now, which is good. It's a good sign. But one of the things that I find sometimes I find myself in when I'm dealing with some product managers is around the use of vanity metrics. And what I mean by that is that it's often that, not often, but I see sometimes people using metrics that actually don't mean when they say the metrics, you are like, so what? And classical examples are the download in the app world, app downloads, app store ratings, impressions. So those metrics might be very flashy, because sometimes the numbers are big, but then you are like, for example, in downloads, yes, but how many people are active? How many people are using your app? How many people are really engaged? So those things become very quickly, they fall apart in the moment that you start doing a bit deeper questions. However, I think that it's a good thing that you use data and metrics to tell your stories. And I think data visualization is something that I encourage also my teams when they are building the product story. Is a key element of this story building, because it can make the difference between getting your audience with you or losing your audience. The other thing that I also, and it's interesting that still I'm seeing these things is about, I call it, I don't know if this, as you might know, I'm not, English is not my mother tongue, so I'm creative in how I use it, but I hope it makes sense. Data sprinkle. What I mean by that is sometimes I'm facing the situation where product managers comes with a lot of data, and they are proud and they are, oh, look at this data, but then there is no strategic. So that's something that you need to be very clear, and we will go a bit deeper later, is that every data point that you use should be the answer to a very specific question that should be tied to your strategic objectives. And that's key in order not to, if you are interacting with a stakeholder and then you throw a bunch of data, but then you don't have a good articulation why you are using that data, is going to look like that you are not really grabbing the concept of what you are trying to achieve in your product. The other piece that is also, especially when you are with people that are not experienced in this domain, is around paralysis by analysis. So there is a lot sometimes that just because you have your best friends with your data analyst, it doesn't mean that you need to go through a bunch of analysis to get the answer. So you need to have very mindful, and this is where you need to, I always encourage, you don't have to have a complete understanding how all the data is stored and manipulated in your organization or in your product, but you need to be mindful around the value by effort in the analysis. Sometimes it's often to see some analysis that you are, okay, you spend this time, but then what actually trying to answer, and is that valuable? Because time is also, especially for data analysis, that is a resource that is not very, there are not many, and many that are good. So you need to be mindful and about this. The other thing that, and the final don't, definitely that I also put a lot of emphasis on, that is around making sure that data is input, not decisioning. So don't fall into the category of using data inputs as your product decisioning and your product features. But what I mean by that, and this is also applies when you are doing research, and users are input. For example, users research is input, not decisioning. That's where you play your role as a product manager. That's where your vision, your strategy, your interpretation of that data is where your value comes into it. Because otherwise, if the data is making the decision on the product, starts becoming, first of all, you are going to end up in some place like the product might not make sense. And the other thing is that you might then question what is the value you are bringing to the table. So this obviously, but definitely you use the data for supporting your story and your thing. Other thing that I just kind of, when I was walking through the why to use data is very important also, and I've seen sometimes for team engagement. So it helps you also when you have a team. Product management, usually we don't have, for certain disciplines, we don't have the direct reports or the chart responsibilities. It helps you to bring the people together. It helps you to get the people engagement. It helps you, maybe the developer, to understand what you are trying to achieve better and going to that extra mile. So also from the human aspect and the team building is also something that I try to use, because it's definitely something that it helps to understand and to bring the teams together. I want to pause here just to make sure, because I don't see, there is a new format for me, and I want to make sure if there's any questions or any comments before I keep moving. No questions?
Yeah, does anyone have any questions that you want to ask at this point? One, I don't see any right now, so you can carry on and you can.
Okay. I'll keep going, and I put this, and it goes back to the vanity metrics that I was mentioning, and I forgot to bring it here in that moment, but I found this. I hope it's the right assignation. This is the person that said this, and this is something that also you can find, and is linked with the comment I was saying about vanity. So sometimes you find yourself in situations where people are just trying to bend the data over to speak to the objective that they want to achieve. So it's good that you have a good understanding what is the objective. It's good that you manipulate the data and that you build the data in order to, you use data visualization, but also don't fall into that bending too much, that then you are going to be caught very easy. And sometimes it's going to be, you just need someone making the right question to discover what you are doing with the data. The other piece that I want to kind of talk around why is data, and I kind of illustrate. By the way, I just want to disclaim all the data and everything that you are going to see here is completely modified. It doesn't relate to anything, to any product or any real. So I just changed it for the purpose of this presentation. So, but it's important that, and this is something that I think, obviously it doesn't apply to all the product managers, because also it depends on what area of what industry you are applying, and the criticality of your application or your product. But it's important that you have this concept of operations and production support in terms of the uses of data. And the reason I'm saying this is that it can be very helpful when you are in situations that you have deployed a feature, the feature has an issue, and then you are trying to figure out what to do with your production team. Do you want to pull it back, or you just hold your breath and making sure that you go through the worst part of the traffic, and then maybe put in a fix later. So this type of things, having this understanding what is the service, the TPS, all these thresholds that you having them in mind in order to help your production support to make those decisions, because the production support is going to look at you in terms of like, what do we do? Do we pull it? Do we call back? And it's important that you get that. And also when it comes to release and things like that, is understanding what are the best windows that you can have in order to ensure that you get the adoption, but also you don't disturb the normal operations of your users and things like that. So I just want to call out this, because that's something that I don't think is talked enough, and it's something that usually is overlooked in the product management world. Now we jump into the next question. What do we need to, what data do we need to make great products? And this can be a very, very overwhelming question sometimes, especially with new products. Where do I start? So I think, and I always start and have my discussions with my product managers around start with the questions. So it's very, I hold them back to go straight to the data analyst and start overwhelming that data, because it's interesting to see them, some of the I've been witnessing some of the behaviors that people start spinning, and then they ask one piece of data and then they go after another piece of data, and then they start losing sight what they are actually trying to understand. So I always encourage to start with the questions and what is the product objectives that you are having, because that's the way to work. And the more complex and the more crisp is your question, the better metrics you are going to come up with. When you start defining those metrics and the things that you want to measure in your product, I think it's good that you have a framework. What you see there is a very, there's nothing revolutionary there, but it's important to have a framework and understanding how to structure those metrics and what is the range that you want to answer those questions and how they are tied to your product objectives. So this is a very classical that I've been using with different flavors depending on the corporation and or the company I've been working. But I always usually split these things in 4 major buckets with a bunch of questions attached to that bucket. So the first one is adoption, or it can be, if you are in an acquisition product, that is about the questions that you want to use. Usually answer there is like, where the users are coming from, am I getting the right users, am I paying for the right users? So it depends in, for example, here's where it starts to play if you are using marketing or not. It's the users that I hypothesize that they are going to come are the ones that are coming and things like that. So here's where it comes. Typical metrics that you see here is activation, CPA, new users take, LTV / new users, cohort analysis. One thing here that I usually also recommend is to think about ratios. What I mean by that is, good you understand what is the, ratios allows you to understand what is the relative brilliantness of your metric versus the total population and things like that. So thinking about in terms of like active users, like if you have active users and you want to understand, are they the right ones? And then you use the ratio of active users with the key metric that you feel that is the important one in terms of like, doing some transaction or things like that. The other bucket that here's where you work, for example, in adoption. And one thing I should say here is that when you work around these metrics and definitions is something also that it's very rare that a product person works. Obviously, it depends on, like if you are in a big corporation or if you are in a startup. So, but that adoption, what are your partners, the key partners in that definition of metrics, and the people that you are going to need in order to understand those metrics and to become to the real numbers that you want to see. So adoption, usually the usual suspects are around marketing, digital marketing folks, that they will help you to kind of understand and to make sure that you get the right things. In the behavior piece, in the next bucket is about understanding the behaviors of your users. So you want to understand how they are behaving, and also if there are differences that you are seeing between one cohort and another cohort, new versus old, and things like that. And here's also is the area that the typical partner that you want to bring in this table, in these metrics, is your design partners, because they are the ones that probably they will help you better if there are problems to kind of start proposing different alternatives to the problems that you are seeing in the metric. Then the third bucket is the ones that you want to, is about business, and is the metrics that you want to understand how your product is. I feel sometimes it depends on what company you are working, and depending on you might not have very direct business responsibility, but it's important that you understand, you have a sense if is the product performing against any business value that you are bringing to the company. And here, like revenue, ARPU, CDR per business transactions, return on investment, things like that is when it comes to play. And here's where your financial folks, and is something that can help you out in order to make sure that you are getting the right numbers. And the final ones I was mentioning before is the operations piece. So here it's important that you have those questions around your product in terms of how the clients, when they are finding problems, how they are seeking help. Are they using the right channels for seeking help? Are they using costly channels? And you can use something about deflection and things like that. As part of this exercise of the what, one of the main areas as product or responsibilities in this whole exercise of the framework is around understanding the cause-effect relationships. And I put in here the story. I guess some of you might know the story, but I think it's a very good story about how to illustrate how they use data and finding those cause-effect relationships. So what you are seeing there is a picture of in the World War II, the Americans, they were having a lot of problems with their bombing. They were seeing that they were not returning, many of them, and then they started analyzing what was going on. What happens is that they start seeing the patterns where these airplanes were hit, and then they came to the conclusion, okay, so these are the places where these planes are getting hit, and then therefore this is the places that we need to start putting more shielding and making them stronger. However, there was a mathematician around the table, and then they said, well, you are missing a big piece of data here, is that you are analyzing the planes that they are coming, but you are not factoring the ones that didn't come. So what actually this data is telling you is just the opposite. It's around that the areas that you should be in, because if they got hit and they came back, that means that they're actually okay. The thing is that when they hit in the areas that you don't see the white dots, that means it's the areas that makes the plane to fall down and to drop. So this is a very, it's a story, and I hope I'm breaking out new for many, but if not, I apologize. But the point I want to make here is that one role that is really, really important for you as a product manager is to understand these cause-effect relationships, and understanding, for example, that you have a seasonality in mind. So, for example, there are certain periods of time that the users behave in a different way, so you don't make attributions to your behaviors and you forget that, or that there's some external factor like a campaign that you are not aware, and all of a sudden you are seeing some impact on your product and you are not factoring that in your cause relationship, and you might be making a misleading product decision. So, and that's really critical when it comes to in the A/B testing and in the world of experimenting with your product. And I put here an example of it's based on some work that I did in the past around A/B testing. So we had a process where there was an account open, and we have this conversion rate, and then we look at the possibility to introduce product info, meaning what was the product about before the opening of the account. Then we look at the numbers and we run the test with all the good stuff, the control groups and all the math coming with that. And if you look at the numbers, definitely you say, if you look at these numbers, say, okay, the cell A is the winner, therefore I go for it. However, as a product manager, here's where you play, and you need to expand. You need to look, if you look the next level, that is the amount of accounts funded, you see that actually what was happening is that the people, yes, we were getting more drop-offs, but the people that they were going through, they were understanding way more what was the product about, and we were getting actually better rates in terms of the funding of the accounts. That was actually what we were interested in. So this is where your role, working with your data analysts and your teams, to understand to broader and to really understand end to end. It's often that you see, especially, I hope, like when in the digital marketing space, it's very temptation. I don't know, but it's very easy to get very narrow and start optimizing, and then you ended up losing sight of what is the real objective of your product, and then you all of a sudden you are optimizing, but you are losing actually you are missing the point completely. So I think that was an interesting point, and always something that I push my teams to think about it when they are doing these experiments. What is the real objective that you are trying to solve? The other thing in A/B testing is very interesting, and it goes back to the point I was making earlier around product decisioning. Data is not product decisioning, it's just input. Sometimes you might feel that even if you have a clear winner in your A/B testing, it doesn't mean that that's the decision that you need to go. So there is the significance from the statistical point of view, but then there is the business or the product significance. So it might be that if someone a bit annoying with mathematics like me can say, hey, but the p-value and all this good mathematical stuff is working, but then it might be from your product perspective, it doesn't make any sense. So you might still stitch with the loser one. So I think this is something that I found very, very often. And I found that, I kind of smile sometimes when I hear, oh, I'm doing 7,000 A/B testings. And like, so what? What is the things that you are optimizing? What is the product objective? What is the uplift that you are getting to see? I stopped here, first of all, because I'm thirsty. And the second one is, there is any questions?
Yes, Juan, we have a few questions on the list here. So I'll start with the first one from Jessica Glanfield.
Oh, no.
Her question is, do you have any advice on how to manage cognitive biases when it comes to developing hypotheses when you're approaching analyzing data? And this is to your point about torturing the data to get the result you want.
That's a difficult question, and thank you, Jessica, for that, for putting me on the spot. But I think this is where it comes the understanding around a bit, obviously, of yourself. I want to go that route in terms of kind of detaching yourself of the process and thinking, okay, am I, there was a post recently in, I don't know, in LinkedIn and Twitter about what are the biases, and there's a classification and there's a whole theory. So that's the first thing that, you don't, looking at yourself, that if you are emotionally invested in the product and things like that. The other thing is that obviously get the support of your design and data analyst. There's a lot of good things now happening in that space to remove the biases and things like that. So I don't have like a playbook to tell you the steps, but those are the things that I would think in terms of helping you to overcome the bias. The other thing is the peer. Play with, if you have a product peer, is also another way to kind of go through the problem and bring in another view to kind of spot biases that you might have from the cognitive perspective. I hope I have answered your question. Otherwise, we will talk later. Any other questions?
Yeah, we have. Do you want to take one more?
Yeah, sure.
This question from Mark, and I think this refers to your previous slide on the frameworks. His question is, how do you define a behavioral funnel in that second column that you showed earlier?
Yeah, good that you got that one. So that's something that especially here is when I was mentioning design comes to play very strongly, your design partners, because at the end of the day, we are dealing, most of the products that we are working with are used by humans. And behavior is part of it. So understanding what are the behaviors that we are expecting is not only, it's easy to remove the human side and go in a very hard numbers in terms of financial transaction. So that behavioral funnel is something that you need to work with the design and understanding what are the key elements that we want to understand in the behaviors. Do we want them to feel empowered? Do we want to feel, and how we can capture those behaviors and that objective in a way that allow us to understand that actually the product is working or the users that are using the product are behaving in the way. As an example, like if we want them to feel satisfied, for example, when they are making a payment. So how we can make sure that we capture that, and it can be something as simple as just at the end of the flow, capturing that, are you satisfied, like a small survey or something like, and then that is allowing you to capture that feeling. So behavioral funnels also it's very often that they overlap with the business funnels, but it's something that I believe is something that is going to come stronger. So it's one thing is that your product is performing as you want in terms of the transaction, but capturing that satisfaction or that mindset of the client to make sure that you are capturing and you are making a good impression and you are building on the top of that client is something that we are working. To be honest, it's something that we are starting right now, and I think it's a very interesting area because you can put someone to search to look for help, but the feeling that or the behavior that you are leaving out there, or the feeling that you are leaving that user is frustration, which is not good. Yes, they managed to find the help, but you didn't achieve the full spectrum of your expectations. I hope I answered your question. And shall I continue or shall I take more questions?
We have a few more questions, Juan, but do you want to go forward a little bit and then take a few more?
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna finish with just how and when to use data in the whole product development. And this depends, I'm not pretending to. I'm not gonna give you like a full, because everyone has their own product development phase. But I think data is used all across your product development, and you need to understand very clearly where you are using and when and how. I think I split this in those 4 categories that you see there, but it's something that I encourage everyone to start from the beginning, and especially that everything starts with the product strategy. So thinking about why you are trying to do this product and what is the from the validation perspective. Here is where you start thinking about what are the metrics that you are trying to measure. Sometimes it's very often one of the things that I see is that I hear the teams starting defining metrics when they are 3 days ahead of releasing, and like, how is this possible? So you need to go those conversations and how you organize those metrics in terms of like the stakeholding, and that is something that I think that we will discuss a bit later. But in the product strategies where you have a little bit work around, like a validation space for product features, the first identification of potential A/B testing, what are the areas that you are unsure around your product that you are knowing that that you are going to need validation. It's important also because A/B testing might take, and especially in the mobile world, it's a bit more complex, and it might be expensive in terms of development. So it's something that you need to factor in the road mapping, and in the part of prioritization. Is part of your. It's really critical that you understand. You don't become one of those product managers that build decks, but they don't have an understanding. When things happen, how much work it is, and you don't have those numbers in your hands. It helps you also to understand, very, very easy how to prioritize products. So it's value versus effort, and estimating when you are going to be releasing. Obviously, in the phase of where the product is out and you start measuring performance and how to do these dashboards and things like that, it helps you to either to keep going with the product or to make those decisions for the future. And the final one, obviously, in the go-to-market, and that you are using for, especially if you are using marketing dollars in order to understand your attribution, your contribution, and things like that. So it's a full process. It's not something that you are isolated in one phase of the product development. You need to understand where you are in your product development and see what are the pieces and the data points you need in order to make those decisions based on your development. And I think with that, I finished. This is all I have in terms of presentation, and now I'm happy to take any questions, comments.
I think that was really great.
I hope it was useful. I hope nobody slipped through the presentation, and happy to take any questions.
Yeah, it's thanks, Juan. We've already had a few comments on the chat channel appreciating the content and the material. So I think it's being appreciated by the attendees. There is a question on the chat channel. This one is from Kyle. Oh, I can take this one. It's Kyle's asking, can we share the slides afterwards? So yeah, so we are recording the entire webinar, so that recording will be made available for everyone on the Products That Count site. Next, we have a question from Tia. And the question is, can you share a real-life example of an A/B test that you've been involved in that completely changed an experience and achieved your product goals?
I think the one that I remember most is that probably the one that I actually see in the presentation, where we changed the account open flow, and we are starting. So when I joined the team in that moment, there was a lot of focus in the one thing that I didn't bring in the presentation is the other side of the funnel in the top, but the team was very focused on the account opens and the optimization of the marketing dollars, which was the right thing for the time that. But I think probably the example that I just mentioned, how something that intuitively was not a good thing to put more screens, if you are having a funnel and, the theory that in the moment that you put a screen in the middle of a process, there's a chance you are increasing your chances to get drop off. Intuitively, it looked like a bad idea, but then all of a sudden, when you start looking at the numbers and you expand your lens from the product side and looking at the value that those clients that you are bringing to the table increase by adding that screen, that was probably one of the learning moments that I took in my career, and now I'm annoying my team with that. So something that I'm insisting them to look very, very carefully, because again, it's very easy. Again, if we look at when we look at those numbers and the marketing and the whole marketing mix, just it was very optimized, but we didn't really have the continuation. And that's something that for those that are working in acquisition is very, very common to really have those, which is the right thing. I'm not saying, but it's your role as a product manager to really understand how horizontally that user behaves. And things like, for example, if you are getting those users, but those users are killing your advice center or your contact center because they don't understand the product later, that's also a bad thing, because yes, you might get very efficient cost per acquisition, but then you are killing that cost by increasing your operational cost, right? So those are the things that you need to play in your mind, and that's where your value comes into play in the product world.
Great. We have a question from Sana. It's a great question. Startups are vague environments and often don't have instrumentation and data. So how do you get product folks to try hypothesis?
That's a very, I had experience in I understand the pain in terms of, and in the startup world, because sometimes the resources are really lean and the things that you have available. So I think don't give up that quickly, and don't use that as, oh, I'm not going to do nothing. I'm going to wait until I get big and then all of a sudden. So what that tells you is that you need to be very laser and ruthless focused on what is the real product objective. So work really hard. What are you trying to achieve in your product? And to find that, call it MVP of data. What are the things, like if it's only one metric that you are going to get, and how to make sure that you get that one and build something on it. Because I've been in the startup world and interacting with them. It's very often that they put, it's an afterthought. And I understand, like when you are building your first product and you are crunching, but I can tell you that if you really do that exercise of thinking and making sure, okay, this is what I'm trying to achieve and why. What is the thing? What is the metric that is going to speak to that very clearly, and trying to build that MVP and making sure that you have all that. So that would be my advice. I know that it's hard to implement because I've been there, and you are in constant crossfire in terms of things to get done. But I would not start with something small, even if it seems very, very small. because it's the only way that you are gonna, because you don't want to enter in a situation that 6 months in the product and you don't have a really good, you are facing some investors and you don't have really good answers because you didn't do some homework in terms of the data.
Great. I have a question from Brent. Feels like a lot of what you've discussed is around performance data. How do you capture and include more qualitative data? Example such as customer interviews, conversations. So how do you fold or compare qualitative versus quantitative data when making decisions?
That's an excellent question, and actually I was kind of expecting, and when I was building the material, because I have a short presentation of 74 slides later if you want guys to go through it, but this is, you don't work in isolation in terms of performance. So that's something that I learned in the hard way. It's like when your partnership with design and user research and finding that connection between the qualitative to the quantitative is key in order to understand, because the user research is key in order to understand and to unpack the whys and why users are behaving and things like that. And then the data is the one that is going to help you to validate that why and things like that. So it's something that is not something that look in isolation. It's something that needs to travel in parallel, and understanding, like when you are, how things start, how is the sequencing is something that it depends on each product, and what, it's different if it's a new product versus it's something that is been there forever and you want to improve. So depending on what type of product you are trying to address, but it's critical that you have that piece of the, because data can be also very, how can I say, data is sometimes going to be, if you look only at hard performance data, it's going to be very hard sometimes to understand the underpinning, like the why a user is using your product. So it's going to give you, like that insight, that richness around the client mindset, the client behavior, the expectations is something that you need to map out, and finding those gaps, like what the clients are saying, what actually doing, what they expect. Those things are triangulating. Those things are three different. Unfortunately, I don't have a playbook I haven't seen any in my career. It's something that comes with experience, and it comes when the more products you do, and the more is the best advice I have. But I hope I answered your question. It was a really good one. Thank you.
We do have a bit of a follow-up question from Brent on that. Like, how do you capture qualitative data?
So user research is also something that it plays around the whole different. So there are different techniques depending on what level of product development. So if you are in the so I use the techniques depending on the objective that I want to achieve with the product. So interviews definitely is one area. If the product is about improvements, I think surveys in terms of like using surveys or a small feedback mechanisms that you can implement in the product, in terms of like some intercept that is, hey, are you satisfied, and things like that is also help. So depending on where you are in the product development, there are different user techniques that we are using, focus groups, all these things. So again, it speaks to what you are trying to achieve, and there's a whole, and probably this is better for, like something that we work really with the design team that helps us to kind of lay out what is the user and how we can get that qualitative data depending on the product and the objectives that we want to achieve. But there are different techniques. You need to be careful, obviously, because surveys, for example, they can be biased, and you need to be very, very careful and understanding what you are doing and having. But there is no lack of techniques. It's something that I encourage you as a product. I usually say you are not a researcher. That's why there is a design team and there are specialists on that. So that's where I lean on the user research, and it's more about articulating what you are trying to achieve with the product, and then kind of putting together the plan and what you think is the tactics. And obviously then it factors if you have budgets, the timing, you have the people and things like that.
Great. We have one question. We have a question from Mark. What are the most important elements of a product funnel? For example, which are the key metrics that you're watching in the short term and the long term when you create a new funnel?
I'm not 100% if I understand, but when you approach a funnel, you need to think and that's, again, a good opportunity to engage with design or the user researcher in terms of like, to have a full view. There are a few things that you need to consider. The full view of the user client or the user journey. So where the client, so from the, and go as far as you possible can from in the terms of the top of the funnel. Where do you think is the first time that someone is going to be hearing about the product you want them to use? And then you start, what is your kind of ideal way that they are going to be ended up to the final goal that you are, like if it's finding a product transaction, and that's your real CTR in terms of conversion rate. So understanding that top of the funnel is definitely one area that I, for those that are in my team right now, they hear, like hello. So that's one area that I focus on them. So understanding that top, where they come from, when they can hear this, and that's where the marketing, and then you start going down. What are the steps that you believe they are going to be taking until you take it in your, and then obviously is when it comes to, once you have those steps, you start building the different steps of the funnel and the CTR, and then you start measuring them and actually are they meeting the expectations in each step. So that's how usually depends on the funnels. The funnels depends on, it's a different funnel if it's in a client acquisition versus it's a purely, for example, feature adoption funnel or things like that. So there are a few techniques around that, but that's pretty much that's the basics of how we start thinking about this.
One, if you could take a question from me, and I encourage others to post more questions as well in the meantime.
It depends if I'm going to look good or not. So.
Yeah, it's an easy one. So we know there's a catalog of kind of industry standard KPIs, right? Like monthly active users and LTVs and CAC and all that. But as a product, but each product is kind of unique as well, and you could create specific metrics for your products as well, which are maybe like more obscure as compared to some of these standard ones. So as a product leader, like how do you balance that? Like, do you focus on kind of the standard metrics that everyone understands and it's easy to communicate with your team and stakeholders, or do you look at very specific niche metrics that like truly articulate how the product is doing, but may not be easily translated to your business stakeholders and your project team?
Yeah, I mean, obviously before. It goes back to one of the themes around the presentation is about the questions you want to answer and the questions that you want to talk to your stakeholder, right? So depending on those questions, it might be that you might find, I always encourage to look you don't have to reinvent the wheel in terms of the metrics. The advantage also that you have, if you identify that the metrics is one of the classical ones, activation, revenue, all that, is that you are going to be probably in a better place. That is something that is coming out of the box in some of the tooling that is in around product analytics. Said that is that it's also very often that you are going to find that those metrics fall short when you start looking for deeper questions and you want to really grasp the real value of your product, understanding how the product. So it's not a black and white answer, but it's something that I always encourage you to look at. The process would be think through your questions very clearly, look what is out there, and also have a conversation with your data analysts, how hard they are, like if you can get out of the get-go, and then see if you are satisfied, if those metrics are answering your questions. If not, then you are going to have to do the hard work of defining them. And I would say that in the moment that you want to get a bit real about this, it's very likely that you are ended up defining your own metric, because every product is a bit different, and it depends also, like how you structure your metrics. And something that I always recommend is like start from the top, define your what I call first level metrics. Those are the ones that, like the really important ones, the ones that if you have 3 minutes to talk to your manager or your stakeholder or your whatever, you are like that. And then you start building down from them in the second level, third level, so that you can always kind of find a way back to the key metric in the first level.
Awesome, thank you for that. And I think with that, I think we are at time. Oh, I see. Oh, awesome. I think we are at time. Thank you so much, Juan. I think that was a Really great discussion. I hope everyone enjoyed it as much as I did. And for the attendees, just want to call out that we'll be having events like this on a monthly basis. So just keep an eye out for all the events that'll come out through Products That Count, and especially through the Toronto chapter. Thanks for joining today. I'm going to pass it on to Rochelle now to close the session.
Yes, thank you again, everyone. Thank you to Juan for such an amazing presentation. Thank you to Arun, our Toronto head of chapter. You wouldn't even be able to tell that this is your first webinar. You're a pro. So looking forward to your next webinars and events moving forward. For more information on this talk and a lot more additional content that you'll find interesting, make sure to visit our website, productsthatcount.com. Our network is definitely a space where product pros can engage, so we welcome you. With that said, thanks again for joining us today, and have a great night, everyone. Bye.
Have a great evening.
Thank you. Bye.